April 5th, 1945, Combined Fleet Headquarters, Hoshi, final orders. Rain hammered the windows as Admiral Sumu Toyota's staff crowded around the operations table. The latest dispatch from Imperial General Headquarters sat in front of them, its message as clear as it was grim. Operation Tano, the surface special attack force would sortie for Okinawa. The mission was brutal in its simplicity: run the battleship Yamato aground and fight as a fortress until the end. Vice Admiral Ryunosake Kusaka set his teacup down and picked up the secure phone. One battleship, one light cruiser, 8 destroyers against the entire American Fifth Fleet. Names like USS Bunker Hill, USS Enterprise, USS Essex, they all knew them. What nobody in that room could really picture was just how badly this desperate mission would end. It would trigger the most devastating carrier airstrike ever launched against a surface warship. The Pacific War had already taught Japanese commanders a cruel lesson. Battleships weren't queens of the ocean anymore. They were just targets. Sink the Yamato, and what was left of the Imperial Navy's pride would go down with her. The Japanese Second Fleet was barely a shadow now. Only one operational battleship, Yamato. Her sister Musashi sunk in the Sibuyan Sea 6 months before. Shinano, converted to an aircraft carrier, didn't even last 2 weeks before American submarines found her. Meanwhile, the USS Bunker Hill sliced through Pacific swells at 25 knots, her Essex-class hull shoving aside 2,700 tons of seawater. Vice Admiral Marc Mitscher stood on the flag bridge, scanning intelligence reports. Task Force 58 was his. 386 aircraft spread across 11 fleet carriers, 6 light carriers. Mitscher, calling the shots from Bunker Hill, led a force built to hurl American air power across the Pacific. F-6F Hellcats for cover, SB-2C Helldivers for dive bombing, and in the bomb bays of TBF Avengers, what really mattered, the Mark 13 aerial torpedo. The Mark 13 was American engineering with 3 years of combat behind it. The early models were unreliable, but the improved version could be dropped at 260 knots from 800 feet up. Each one packed 600 pounds of Torpex explosive. American pilots had figured out how to hit one side of a ship and make it list so badly that counter-flooding was impossible. Commander James D. Ramage, Air Group Commander on the Enterprise, had studied Japanese ships so obsessively he could draw Yamato's armor layout from memory. He grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, had a degree in aeronautical engineering, and knew that taking down Yamato meant hitting below the armor belt with torpedoes, knocking out anti-aircraft guns with bombs, and getting the timing just right. Success or disaster would come down to coordination and overwhelming force. On the Yamato, Captain Kosaku Aruga read the mission orders for maybe the 10th time. On April 6th, the ship would take on 3,400 tons of fuel oil at Tokuyama Depot. The depot crew, quietly ignoring orders to provide only enough fuel for a one-way trip, would give the task force 60% of a full load, more than authorized, but still not enough to make it back if they had to fight. Aruga had seen destroyers at Midway, watched Akagi and Kaga go up in flames under American bombs. He knew exactly what carrier aircraft could do to a ship with no air cover. Yamato displaced 72,089 tons fully loaded, her 12 boilers driving 4 turbines. The crew, 3,332 men, had survived air attacks at Leyte Gulf, dodged submarines in the Philippine Sea, and made it through near misses during the March raids on Kure. But Yamato's biggest weakness hadn't changed since Pearl Harbor: massed air attack from every direction at once. Out at sea, the American carriers split into 3 groups, steaming toward the intercept point. Task Group 58.1 to the north, 58.3 to the east, 58.4 racing in from refueling. Each carrier launched search planes in wide box patterns, Radar operators stared at their screens, filtering out false echoes from waves and rain squalls. Lieutenant CMDR Joseph Taylor, the aircraft coordinator, had been running these operations for 20 months. His hands moved almost on their own across the radios, keeping the whole air show in motion. Launches every 90 minutes, patrols at 3 altitudes, strike groups assembling at prearranged spots. Weather was turning ugly. Cloud base down to 3,000 feet. Squalls sweeping through. Visibility shifting from 2 miles to 10. No one could say what the next day would bring. But every man involved knew history was coming straight at them. April 6, 1945, at exactly 3:20 in the afternoon, the Yamato Task Force pulled away from Tokuyama Harbor, 10 ships in all, with the light cruiser Yahagi taking the lead, destroyers in line behind her, and Yamato herself bringing up the rear. The Emperor had asked, "But what about the Navy? What are they doing to help defend Okinawa?" This was their answer. Everyone on board knew it was hopeless, a gesture, nothing more. Vice Admiral Seiichi Itito, commanding from Yamato's bridge, didn't want to go. He only agreed after learning the Emperor was waiting for action. As the ships made their way through Bungo Strait, that narrow stretch between Kyushu and Shikoku, they were already being watched. 2 American submarines waited. USS Threadfin, under Commander John Joseph Foote, picked them up on radar around 5:45, 10 ships, holding formation speed 22 knots heading southwest. Foote surfaced, sent his contact report in plain language. He knew the Japanese would hear it, but speed mattered more than secrecy now. Further south, the USS Hackleback took over tracking as the Japanese entered the East China Sea. Commander Frederick Edward Janney followed them all night, sending out 4 detailed reports, even with Japanese destroyers searching for him. Dawn, April 7th. The weather turned ugly. Clouds hung at 1,500 feet. Rain squalls cut visibility to 5 miles. At 6 fighters from Kailushu showed up for air cover, just like they'd promised. They stayed for 4 hours, circling high above the clouds, 15,000 feet up. Truth be told, they were no help against low-flying torpedo planes. Admiral Spruance, leading the 5th Fleet, had his battleships ready for surface combat, 6 modern battleships, radar-guided 16-inch guns, all pointed at Yamato, which was already running low on fuel. But Vice Admiral Mitscher had his own plan. At 8, without waiting for Spruance's go-ahead, he ordered his carriers to launch strikes. Back with the Japanese just before 7, the destroyer Asashimo signaled engine trouble and started dropping behind. Captain Kotaki, in command of Destroyer Division 21, tried emergency repairs, but the damage was too much. Asashimo kept falling back, while the rest pressed on toward Okinawa. At 10, American carriers began launching the strike. It was massive, 132 fighters, 50 dive bombers, 98 torpedo planes. Planes from 11 carriers all going after one target. Fighters went in first to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Dive bombers attacked from every direction they could, splitting up defensive fire. Torpedo planes timed their runs to hit the same side together. PBM Mariner flying boats kept circling, just out of gun range, feeding constant position updates over the radio. At 12:20, Yamato's lookout spotted the first American planes, dark specks in the clouds, growing larger and multiplying. Anti-aircraft crews tracked them, waiting for the order. At 12:32, Yamato fired her main guns, 9 18-inch monsters, each shell weighing over 3,000 pounds, exploding midair and sending thousands of burning fragments everywhere. The pilots just changed altitude to dodge them. At best, those guns could only fire once a minute in anti-aircraft mode. American planes were coming in every few seconds. The first big attack hit at 12:35. Planes from the Bennington and Hornet split into groups. Through the rain and spray, Yamato looked impossibly huge, 863 feet long, her pagoda superstructure rising 150 feet above the water. Every gun opened up, filling the air with a deadly web of tracers. At 12:37, the first torpedo slammed into Yamato's port side near the aft secondary guns. Water shot 100 feet into the air. 2 minutes later, a second torpedo hit her midships. Then a 1,000-pound bomb punched through the deck by the aft turret, lighting fires that would burn until she sank. Damage control raced to flood starboard compartments to counter the list, but the hits just kept coming faster than they could fix them. Meanwhile, Asashimo, still struggling with her engines, got caught by planes from the San Jacinto at 12:30. She couldn't maneuver, took several bombs and torpedoes, and went down with all hands. 326 men, including Captain Kosaku. No one survived. At 12:43, the destroyer Hamikaze took a direct hit on the bridge. A bomb killed the captain and most of the bridge crew. Out of control and burning, torpedo bombers finished her off. 242 men went down with her. All the while, Yahagi, the light cruiser at the front, was getting hammered by aircraft from 3 different carriers. Bombs and torpedoes hammered Yamato until she was dead in the water, burning out of control. By 1 in the afternoon, she'd already taken at least 5 torpedo hits, all on her port side. She was listing hard. 15 degrees, even though the crew kept flooding compartments on the other side to balance her. Speed dropped to 18 knots. Meanwhile, the second wave was coming in. 100 more planes from task groups 58.1 and 58.3, fresh pilots, full loads of ammo, and a battleship that couldn't really dodge anymore. The torpedo bombers went after her in tight formation, 3 separate groups all zeroing in on that battered port side. At 1:42 p.m., 3 more torpedoes slammed home. The list jumped to 20 degrees. Water poured through twisted hatches, flooding spaces that were supposed to stay dry. The assistant damage control officer told Captain Aruga that counter-flooding wouldn't work anymore. Everything on the starboard side was already flooded. Vice Admiral Ito saw where things were heading. At 1:50, he called off Operation Tango. Signal flags went up, telling the surviving destroyers to pick up anyone who made it off Yamato. But the radios were wrecked, so the only way to talk to the rest of the ships was with visual signals, waving flags through smoke and spray. Just after Tuzu, Captain Aruga gave the order to abandon ship, but with the ship listing close to 30 degrees, moving on deck was nearly impossible. Men slipped and slid down the slanting steel into the sea. Others never got out, trapped below by jammed hatches or flooded passages. The Emperor's portrait was taken off the bridge and handed to a junior officer with clear orders: stay alive. Executive Officer Captain Jiro Nomura begged Aruga to leave, but the captain wasn't going anywhere. He tied himself to the compass with a rope, determined to go down with the ship. Vice Admiral Ito shut himself in his cabin, ignoring everyone who pleaded with him to escape. At 2:07, another torpedo hit the starboard side, the only one to strike there. By then, the list was over 35 degrees and men were jumping from the high side, falling 60 feet to the water. The main gun turrets, each weighing almost 200 tons, started breaking loose. At 2:14, Yamato rolled onto her side, the hull still sliding forward even as she capsized. Hundreds of men were trapped inside. 3 minutes later, the forward magazines exploded. The blast was so massive, people saw the mushroom cloud from 160 kilometers away. It shot 20,000 feet into the sky, punched right through the clouds. The shockwave threw American planes around and even did a little damage to a few that strayed too close. When the smoke cleared, Yamato was gone. All that was left was wreckage and oil, just a smear on the sea where the world's biggest battleship had floated a few minutes before. Out of a crew of 3,332, only 276 survived. Vice Admiral Ito, Captain Aruga, and almost all the senior officers went down with her. The destroyers Yukazi and Fuyutsuki managed to rescue survivors, dodging air attacks and tossing anything that would float to the men in the water. Kasumi, her bow blown off, was scuttled by torpedoes from Fuyutsuki. Isukazi, burning and helpless, was also scuttled. The light cruiser Yahagi went down at 2:05 after putting up a fierce fight against impossible odds. The final count was brutal. 6 out of 10 Japanese ships sunk. Over 4,100 sailors dead. American losses? Just 10 planes and 12 aircrew. Carrier aviation had done in 2 hours what it used to take battleships a full day to accomplish if they could pull it off at all. Task Force 58 showed the world what carrier warfare looked like at its best. Strikes from multiple carriers, attacks focused on one side to overwhelm defenses, pilots working together with deadly accuracy. 3.5 years after Pearl Harbor, the air power advocates' predictions played out in the most dramatic way possible. The psychological blow to the Imperial Navy was devastating. Yamato was more than a ship. She was a floating symbol of Japan. Even her name carried weight. It was the ancient, poetic name for the country itself. Losing her didn't just mean defeat at sea. It felt like a kind of national heartbreak. Admiral Toyota later wrote that after this, the Imperial Navy was done as a fighting force. Intelligence played its part too. American codebreakers were reading Japanese messages sometimes before Japanese captains even got their orders. Submarines were already in place, search patterns locked in, and surprise was off the table. The difference in training and resources between the two navies was clear as day. In 1945, American pilots arriving in the Pacific usually had about 300 hours of flight training. Japanese pilots, just 100, that gap mattered. American squadrons rotated home after their combat tours to help train new pilots. Japanese squadrons, they stayed in the fight until they were wiped out. The battle changed how navies built ships after the war. Every major navy paid attention. They realized battleships were finished. Anti-aircraft defenses needed a total overhaul, and radar and communications were now as important as guns and armor. Admiral Mitscher's after-action report hammered the point. Coordination was everything. Imagine 11 carriers launching strikes. The timing had to be perfect, or they'd trip over each other. The lessons stuck. They used them in Korea just 5 years later. Personal stories put a human face on all this. Mitsuru Yoshida, one of the few Yamato bridge officers to survive, later wrote about watching American pilots push their attacks through an absolute storm of anti-aircraft fire. He said their courage matched any samurai. Captain Tamichi Hara from the destroyer Yahagi survived her sinking too. He wrote with real feeling about the utter pointlessness of the fight. The battle's impact went way past the immediate victory. Operation Tengo's failure left Okinawa's defenders stranded. No naval help coming. Over 50,000 Americans died at Okinawa, but if Yamato had actually reached those beaches, that number would have climbed even higher. The destruction of Yamato shaped how planners thought about invading Japan. If the Japanese were ready to send their last battleship on a suicide run, what would they do defending their own homeland? 4 months later, the US dropped the atomic bomb, partly because everyone believed Japan was willing to accept any level of casualties. It wasn't until 1985 that divers found Yamato's wreck split in two in 340 meters of water. The bow section landed upright. People could still see the chrysanthemum crest. The stern was a mess, blown apart by the magazine explosion. Modern analysis says Yamato took about a dozen torpedo hits and half a dozen bomb hits. The real killer was progressive flooding from multiple torpedoes on her port side. Years later, veterans from both sides met again. In 1985, some of Yamato's survivors shook hands with the American pilots who had attacked them. The Japanese admitted the mission was doomed from the start. The Americans showed real respect for the courage of men who sailed knowing they wouldn't come back. Today, thousands visit the memorial at Kure, where Yamato was built. Japanese visitors honor the crew's sacrifice. Americans come to understand their former enemies. The museum leans into peace, a reminder of war's terrible cost. Movies and books keep shaping how people remember. The 2005 Japanese film Yamato painted the crew as brave, but their sacrifice as futile. Honestly, both sides have a point. The battle was a tragedy for the men who died and a clear sign of how fast military technology was changing. The story's not over. There's still an estimated 1,000 tons of oil inside the wreck, slowly leaking out. The wreck is a war grave now, protected by international agreement. Around the world, teachers use this battle to show why air superiority matters, why clinging to outdated tactics is dangerous, and what happens when pride blocks common sense. Military academies study Operation Tengo as a warning. Institutional pride can blind leaders to reality. From a technical view, American tactics were sharp. Torpedo bombers came in at precise angles to maximize their hits. Dive bombers went after communications and fire control. Fighters took out anti-aircraft guns in carefully timed waves. This wasn't chaos, it was a choreographed attack. Weather mattered too. Low clouds made high-altitude bombing impossible, so planes had to get closer and risk more anti-aircraft fire. Rain squalls gave cover to torpedo bombers. Rough seas made it harder to control damage. The Japanese had communication breakdowns on top of everything else. Yamato's radio antennas got knocked out early so they couldn't coordinate. Smoke blocked flag signals. With communications down, organized resistance basically collapsed. Leaders made choices that reflected their cultures. Mitscher acted fast, launching strikes without waiting for orders. Ito followed commands, even when he doubted them. Aruga did his duty, no questions asked. Every decision made a difference. Now, Yamato lies broken at the bottom of the East China Sea, her guns silent, her crew entombed inside. The battle's over, but its lessons linger. Technology set the limits. Sheer courage couldn't beat material odds. In the end, pride led to ruin. When the battleship Yamato went down, it didn't just signal the end of battleships. It forced everyone to face what war really is. Operation Tenno didn't achieve its military goal, but it made one thing clear. Fighting with outdated ideas is pointless. That lesson came at a huge price. Over 4,000 Japanese sailors and a dozen Americans lost their lives. In the end, that's Yamato's real legacy. It's a warning about what war costs, one that still hangs in the air today.